A short way up the Little Colorado River, from the point where it empties into the Colorado, down in the rock of the Grand Canyon, there is a dome of yellow stone about the height of a two-story house, almost perfectly round, with a spring bubbling out of a hole in the very top of it. Nobody built it. It grew, the slow way that mineral water grows a thing, one thin skin of travertine at a time, over a stretch of years long enough that the number stops meaning much. Water still moves in the opening at its crown. If you came upon it knowing nothing, you would call it a strange and pretty piece of geology and walk on past it. The Hopi do not walk on past it. For a great many Hopi, that dome is the most important place in the world, because it is the door their people came up through, and it carries a name far older than any map that leaves it blank. They call it the Sipapuni, the place of emergence. And what I want to do in this video is stand right on the line between those two descriptions, the geology and the emergence, and refuse to blur it, because nearly everything that has ever been said about something living beneath the Grand Canyon blurs exactly that line, and blurs it on purpose. So let me set an honest frame before I say another word. There really is a dome, there really is a river, there really is a people who point to that spot and say, that is where we came into this world, and that people is not gone. They are living in northern Arizona right now. All of that sits on the daylight side of the line, and I can put the receipts in front of you. What the Hopi say came up out of that hole, and what they say still lives in the world below it, sits on the far side of the line, inside their religion, and I am not going to hand it to you as though a survey crew went down and confirmed it. I am going to hand it to you as what it honestly is, a sacred account, carried by a living people, and written down more than 100 years ago by men we can name. Two of those men are the reason this video can exist at all. In the winter of 1905, a museum in Chicago printed a book with a plain brown cover and a plain title, The Traditions of the Hopi. The man who had spent years gathering the material inside it was named Henry R. Voth. A few years before that, working for the Bureau of American Ethnology in Washington, a man named Jesse Walter Fuchs had been writing down the Hopi migrations and pieces of the same emergence account, up on the same high desert mesas, real dates, real printed pages, real names attached to who said what. That is the ground I want under our feet the whole way through, because the moment you step off it, this particular story turns into one of the silliest things the internet has ever kept on life support, and I would rather deal with that silliness once, plainly, and then leave it behind us for good. Here is the silly thing, so that you know that I know it is sitting there. In the spring of 1909, a newspaper called the Arizona Gazette ran a front-page story about a secret cavern high in the wall of the Grand Canyon, supposedly packed with mummies and Egyptian relics and rows of hieroglyphs, supposedly dug out under the direction of the Smithsonian. It named an explorer it called G.E. Kincaid, and a professor it called S.A. Jordan. And that single article has fed 100 years of talk about a lost city under the canyon, and a grand cover-up arranged to keep it from you. I will be short about it, because short is what it deserves. There is no record that a G.E. Kincaid ever existed. There is no record that a Professor Jordan ever existed. The Smithsonian holds no file on the expedition, because there was no expedition. Even the next paper down the road, the Coconino Sun, was joking within 2 weeks that the whole thing read like the work of a well-known traveling hoaxer of the day. The historians who make a study of fake archaeology file the episode exactly where it belongs, as a slow news day at a small paper that got creative to move a few more copies. It is a stunt from 1909. It is not Hopi. The Hopi never told it. I am setting it on the floor right now, and I am stepping over it, and we will not bend down and pick it back up. Because here is what that stunt actually stepped on, and it is the reason the thing nags at me the more I read. There was already a real answer to the question of what lives beneath the Grand Canyon. It was already named. It had been named for longer than English had been spoken anywhere in Arizona, by the people who have lived beside that canyon the entire time. The newspaper did not uncover a hidden mystery under the rock. It threw a cheap sheet over one that was already standing there in the open, held by living people who would have told you about it if anyone had thought to come and ask. So let us go and ask. Let us do the plain thing the newspaper could not be bothered to do, which is take the Hopi at their word, on their own terms, and follow it down. Start with the men who wrote it down, because on this channel the written record is the whole reason we get to speak about any of it. Henry R. Voth was a Mennonite missionary. I will not pretend that is a simple thing to sit with. He came to the Hopi mesas to change the Hopi religion, to replace it with his own, and in the middle of that work he learned the language well enough to do without an interpreter, and he sat through the ceremonies, and he wrote down what he heard with a care that most men of his moment never managed. It is one of the stranger debts history leaves you holding. A great deal of what survives in writing from that exact place and year survives because a man who wanted the religion gone could not stop himself from recording it faithfully. Fuchs, on the government payroll, was working the same people from a different angle, more fixed on the migrations, on how the separate clans remembered coming up into this world and then wandering to the places they finally settled. Between the two of them, right at the turn of the century, the tradition got set on paper by people who had actually been in the room when it was spoken aloud. And I want to say clearly, before we go down, that this is not only a story about 2 old books and 2 dead men. The Hopi are here. The account did not end when the ethnographers closed their notebooks and went home. In our own lifetime, the people who hold this tradition have said the same things out loud, in plain English, for anyone willing to listen. Lee Kuanwisiuma, who ran the Hopi Cultural Preservation Office for decades, has put it about as directly as it can be put. The Grand Canyon, he says, is the Hopi genesis, and it is also the Hopi final spiritual home. We emerged from the canyon, he says, at a place called Sipapuni, and that place is the path to the underworld. So when I read you a sentence off a page from 1905, understand that I am not digging up a dead belief. I am quoting the old written end of something that a living man will tell you today is simply true. Now, to the place itself, because the place is where the whole thing hangs. The Sipapuni is not a metaphor, and it is not a location that got lost and has to be hunted for. It is that yellow travertine dome down in the gorge of the Little Colorado, a short way up from where that river joins the Colorado, in the eastern reach of the Grand Canyon. It is real enough to stand next to, and yet almost none of us ever will. And that is not an accident of geography. It is sacred ground, closed by the Hopi themselves, and the closing runs deep. Lyle Balanqua, a Hopi man trained as an archaeologist, has said that he himself has never been to the emergence point, because there are cultural boundaries he has to respect as a Hopi person, and reaching that spot the right way would require preparation and initiation he has not undergone. Sit with that for a moment. A Hopi scholar, who works in that canyon, holds the place in enough reverence that he has not gone to look at it. That tells you more about what it means than any description of the rock ever could. And the Hopi did not leave the place behind at the bottom of a canyon most of them would never reach. They carried a copy of it home. In a Hopi kiva, the ceremonial room dug down into the earth, there is a small round hole cut into the floor. It is called the sipapu, the same word, worn down a little. It is a small model of the opening the people climbed through, kept underfoot in the very room where the ceremonies are held, so that the door out of the world below is never more than a step away while the people are gathered. They did not write the emergence into a book and shut the book. They cut a picture of the door into the floor and stand over it, again and again, year after year. The real dome sits unreachable in the canyon. A little echo of it waits in the ground of every ceremonial room they build. It is worth stopping on the spot itself, because the geography is doing real work in the belief. The place the Hopi point to is not a random stretch of desert. It is a confluence, the meeting of 2 rivers, where the Little Colorado comes down out of its own deep gorge, its water heavy and strange, with the minerals it has carried the whole way, and pours into the larger Colorado in the heart of the canyon. A confluence is already a kind of seam in the land, a place where 2 separate things run together and become one, and the Hopi placed the door between the worlds at exactly such a spot. Kuanwisiuma names that meeting of the waters, not some vague stretch of country, as the resting place of the ancestral dead. The 2 rivers coming together, the odd mineral water, the dome the spring slowly built on the bank, and the door to the world below, are all, in the Hopi reading, a single thing. Nobody dropped a sacred site into the canyon. The canyon made it, and the Hopi were the ones who understood what it was. So here is what the tradition says about that dome, and here is where we cross off the daylight side of the line and into the account itself. Everything after this is the Hopi telling, in the shape they tell it, and I will keep marking the crossing so you always know which side of the line we are standing on. The Hopi say this is not the first world. They say the people once lived below, in a world under this one, and that the world below went wrong in the oldest and most human way a world can, and that a remnant of the people climbed up out of it, up through that opening in the canyon, into the world we are standing in now. I am not going to walk you through the climb itself here, the ladder and the long ascent, because that is its own long story, and it deserves its own telling. What matters for us is only the shape of it. There was a world below. There was a door. The people came up through the door, and the door did not close behind them. That is the piece almost everyone misses, and it is the whole hinge of this video, so let me say it as plainly as I can. In the Hopi account, the Sipapuni is not a one-way exit that the people used once and sealed. It is a passage that stays open, running both directions, between this world and the world beneath it. Kuanwisioma called it exactly that, the path to the underworld, present tense, a road that is still a road. Things came up through it, at the beginning, and in the tradition, things are still going down through it, and still coming back up through it, right now, in a traffic between the living world and the world below that has never once stopped. To understand what the Hopi say lives under that canyon, you have to follow that traffic in both directions. And the first thing to understand is who was already down there, and who was waiting at the top of the door when the people first came up. Because they were not climbing up into an empty world. Somebody already owned the place. When the people came up out of the opening, in the account Voth wrote down, they found a being waiting for them, and the description of him is so specific that I want to give it to you close to the words on the page. A very handsome man, it says, with 4 strands of turquoise around his neck, and very large turquoise pendants hanging from his ears, and on his face 2 black lines drawn from the top of his nose down across his cheeks. And standing right beside this handsome man, propped at his side like a companion, was a mask, and the mask was hideous. That is the Hopi being called Masawu, skeleton, the name is often turned into in English, and that pairing, the handsome face and the ugly mask standing beside it, is not a decoration. It is the truest thing the story can show you about him in a single image, because Masawu is 2 things at once, and he never stops being both. He is the owner and the keeper of this world, the surface world, the one the people were climbing up into, and he is, at the very same time, the god of death and the lord of the world below. The finest scholarly study of him we have, a book called Masawu, Profile of a Hopi God, put together by the linguist Ekahart Malotki with a Hopi collaborator named Michael Lomatuema, lays out just how many things this single being is. He is the god of death and the ruler of the underworld. He is the owner of fire. He is tied to the growing of crops and the making of life. He is a keeper of the land and, in some tellings, a trickster and a power of war. Hold those together, and you start to see why he is the being standing at the top of the door. He is the one figure in the whole tradition who belongs to both sides of it at once. He owns the world you climb up into, and he rules the world you go back down to when you die. He is, if you like, the doorman of the Sipapuni, standing at the exact seam between the living and the dead, wearing a handsome face and keeping a monster's mask within arm's reach. And do not pass too quickly over the fire, because the fire is the hinge of who he is. Masawu is the owner of fire, and in a cold, barely lit world just climbed up into out of the ground, fire is the one thing that makes any life possible at all. It is the fire around his little field that keeps the earth warm enough to grow anything. It is fire that holds off the dark. So the being who rules the world below is also the one who holds the single power that lets the living get through their first cold nights above the ground. Even the 2 black lines drawn down his face in the account are made of a real substance, a glittering iron mineral the old text calls specular iron, the kind of exact physical detail that tends to survive only because someone was describing a thing they had actually been shown, rather than making it up. The same being keeps the fire that grows the corn and the country where the dead go. That is who the Hopi say met their ancestors at the top of the door, and the way he greets the survivors tells you what kind of a world he is handing them. He does not promise them riches. In the account, he tells them plainly that he lives there in poverty, that he has almost nothing. He keeps a small field, and he keeps a fire burning all the way around it so the ground stays warm enough to grow food in a cold and half-lit world, and his food is somehow never gone no matter how little of it there seems to be. When the people ask whether they may live here with him, He does not sell them a paradise. He says, "This is how I live, poor, with almost nothing, and if you are willing to live that way too, then you are welcome to stay." The guardian of the world greets the newcomers by warming a patch of dirt with fire and telling them the honest truth about how thin the living is going to be. That is the welcome at the top of the door. If you're new here and enjoying this kind of historical depth, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. So that is who was waiting at the top of the door. Now follow the traffic the other way, downward, because the deepest thing the Hopi say about the world below comes at the other end of life. It is about where everyone goes when they die. And the tradition is careful to tell you that the people learned this the hardest possible way, in the very first days after they came up, before the new world even had its full share of light. I am going to keep this part short, because the scene it comes from belongs to another telling, and I do not want to borrow the whole of it. What you need is only the lesson the people took from it. In those first days above, a child died. It was the first death in the new world, and it stopped everything, because nobody yet knew what death even was, or where it led. And the answer they were given, in the account Voth set down, is the sentence this whole video is built to reach. When someone dies, they were told, that person goes down there, and remains below only 4 days, and after the 4 days comes back again and lives with the people. And to prove it, the grieving father was made to look down through the opening, back into the world they had climbed out of, and there, moving among the others in the world below, alive, was his dead child. Read that slowly, because it rearranges everything. In the Hopi account, the world that lies beneath this one is not empty, and it is not dead. It is the most crowded place there is. It is where every single person who has ever died has gone. The floor of this world is the ceiling of that one. The opening in the canyon is the door between them. And in this tradition, dying is a climb back down through the same hole the people once climbed up, into a country where the dead go on living, watched over by the one being who owns both sides of the door. That being is Masawu, the keeper of the dead, and he tends that lower country the way a caretaker keeps a house he is responsible for. When the Hopi say something lives beneath the canyon, this is the first and largest part of what they mean. Their ancestors do. All of them. But the traffic does not stop there, and this is the turn that took my breath a little when I first followed it all the way through, because the dead do not stay down. They come back up, and they come back up in the one form that matters most, on a high desert that is always thirsty. They come back as rain. This is where the old written record and the living Hopi voice line up so exactly that the gap of 100 years between them almost disappears. In the tradition, the spirit of a Hopi who has lived a good life travels, after death, down to the canyon and through the opening into the world below, and then, in time, returns to the living world as a cloud. Kuan Wisiuma, the same man from the cultural office, describes the whole circuit without any hedging at all. When we die, he says, the spirit travels to the Grand Canyon, to the area around the confluence, which is the home of the ancestral spirits, and from the canyon the spirits travel out across the world as clouds. And then he adds the line, I cannot stop thinking about. When the Hopi see clouds, he says, they are taught to revere them and not to look at them directly, because those clouds are the spirits of their own ancestors. Think about what that does to an ordinary sky. For the Hopi, a rain cloud coming up over the mesas in late summer is not weather. It is the dead coming home for a visit, carrying the one gift the living most need, which is water for the corn. This is the meaning underneath the Katsinam, the spirit beings that so much of the outside world has only ever seen as painted dolls on a shelf. The Katsinam are, among other things, the ancestors in this returning form, the cloud people, the ones who went down through the door and come back up over it as rain. There is a season for their coming. It opens in the deep of winter and runs through the summer, and in the heavy months of July and August, when the desert most needs it, the clouds gather over the fields, and the Hopi understand that as an answer, the dead returning up through the world below to stand over the living as rain. The traffic through the Sipapuni, in other words, is not a piece of ancient history. For the Hopi, it happens every single time it rains, and you have to feel the desert under that belief to understand its weight. The Hopi raise corn on some of the driest, least forgiving ground anyone has ever tried to farm. High mesas where a single failed rain can mean a hungry winter. Water there is the whole margin between a full season and a starving one. So a tradition that tells you the rain is your own ancestors coming back to feed you is carrying about as much as a belief can carry. When a Hopi farmer watches a thunderhead pile up over the fields in August and lowers his eyes out of respect, he is watching, in the shape the tradition hands him, his own grandparents arrive with the exact thing his children need in order to survive. That is what the reverence is made of. So set the two directions side by side, because together they are the answer the newspaper stole. The Hopi say the world under the canyon is where their people came up from at the beginning, where their dead go down to in the end, and where the rain comes up from in between, kept by a being who is at once the owner of this world and the lord of that one. That is what lives beneath the canyon, in the account that actually has age and authority behind it. It is not a lost race, and it is not a hidden city with a cover story bolted over it. It is a world of the dead, and the clouds they come back as, and a keeper who owns both sides of the door, named and located and held in reverence by a living people for longer than anyone can measure. And here is the part that turns all of this from belief into something you could have watched with your own eyes. The Hopi did not only speak about the world below, they went there themselves, on foot and on purpose, again and again, for what one Hopi man reckons is probably thousands of years. There is a trail, and it carries a plain and heavy name, the Salt Trail, and it runs from the Hopi mesas westward, across the Painted Desert, to the gorge of the Little Colorado, and then it plunges down through the rock, down into the canyon, down toward the river, and the salt that lies near the bottom of the world. We know a great deal about that journey because of a third recorder, a man named Misha Titiev, an anthropologist out of Harvard, who published a careful account of a Hopi salt expedition in the year 1937. And what Titiev understood, and wrote down clearly, is that the salt trip was never only about salt. The reason a man had to be ritually prepared to make it, the reason it was counted a genuinely dangerous and holy thing to do, was the destination. The salt deposit lies near the home of the dead. To go down the salt trail was to walk to the very edge of the world below, to the doorstep of the country we have been describing this whole time, and to come back out again. A man who returned from it with his load of salt was thought of, plainly, as brave, and he had reason to be. The whole descent is soaked in the tradition we have been following. The rites Titiev recorded turn on the two little war gods, the brothers the Hopi hold responsible for the salt in the first place, the same pair the tradition credits with cutting the canyon itself and setting the shrines along the route. The pilgrims carried prayer feathers and cornmeal down into the gorge and left offerings at those shrines as they went, marking the road down the way you would mark the approach to a holy and dangerous place, because that is exactly what it was. And on the way, in the older practice, they stopped at the Sipapuni itself. They went to the emergence dome, the door, and gathered a sacred yellow clay from it, and only then continued on, down and down, to the salt near the home of the dead. One trip, threaded through the whole cosmology. The door they came up through at the beginning, the clay from its very rim, and the salt from the edge of the country of the dead, all gathered on a single walk into the deepest part of the canyon. And Titiev is careful about how heavy the preparation was, because the weight of it is the proof of what the Hopi believed they were walking toward. A man did not simply decide to go. There were things to be done beforehand, and things to be watched for on the road, prayer feathers to be made and set down, cornmeal to be carried and sprinkled, signs to be read in whatever happened along the way. The whole apparatus a people brings out only for the most serious kind of undertaking. The salt lay in the depths of the canyon, and reaching it and climbing back out meant days of hard, exposed travel through country that could kill a careless man on its own terms, before you ever added the fact that you were walking to the edge of the land of the dead. That is why coming home mattered as much as it did. To come back up out of that gorge with the salt on your back was to have gone down to the doorstep of the lower world and been allowed back out again, and the people met a man who had done it with a real and particular respect. The yellow clay from the emergence dome had its own uses once it was home, a sacred pigment for the body and for the ceremonies. So a man came back carrying two things at once, the clay from the very rim of the door and the salt from the country beyond it. One walk that touched both the beginning of the people and the end of them. And it was not open to just anyone. In the tradition Balanqua describes, this was a journey for initiated men, a rite of passage, bound up with the Hopi manhood ceremony, the long and serious business of becoming a full member of the people. You did not wander down for salt the way you would run to a store. You earned the right to go, you prepared yourself for it, and you understood, every step of the way down, that you were walking toward the same opening your ancestors had climbed up through, and toward the country where they now lived. The Salt Trail is the emergence account with your own boots on. It is a living people physically retracing the shape of their own cosmology, down through real rock to the real doorstep of the world they say lies beneath. Now let me carry us back up out of the canyon, and back across the line into plain daylight, because I want to be just as honest closing this as I tried to be opening it. Everything I have told you from the tradition, the door that runs both ways, the dead in the world below, the clouds that are the returning ancestors, the being who keeps both sides, all of that is Hopi religion. I am not standing here telling you a survey team has confirmed a country of the dead under the Grand Canyon. I am telling you that this is what the Hopi say, and that they have said it consistently, in the same shape, from the pages Voth and Fuchs wrote down at the turn of the century, through Titiev's account in the 1930s, to living men speaking plainly into a recorder in our own time. That consistency does not make it geology. It makes it something arguably rarer, which is a genuinely old belief, still whole, still held, still walked. I owe you the limits on my own side of this too, because being honest about the record is part of the reverence. Everything I have read you comes through translation. These were Hopi words first, spoken in a Hopi world, and they reached me as English on a printed page, filtered through the ears and the choices of outsiders more than 100 years ago, meaning leaks away through that many layers. And the men who gave these accounts to Voth and to Fuchs and to Titiev decided, every single time, what an outsider was allowed to carry off, and what had to stay behind, and they were completely right to keep the deepest things for themselves. So I am not claiming to have handed you the whole of it. Nobody outside the initiated societies could, and nobody outside them should. What I have handed you is the part the careful record managed to hold, with its own gaps left showing, which is a smaller and a far more honest promise than the confident, complete, fully decoded version you will find pasted across the corners of the internet that never once opened one of these books. And that is exactly the thing the newspaper story could not stand, and the thing I keep coming back to. The lie from 1909 needed the canyon to be empty of any real meaning so that it could fill it with a fake one, a hidden vault, and a cover-up, and a professor who never existed. But the canyon was never empty. It was, and it is, one of the most densely meaningful places on the continent, and its meaning was already spoken for, in a language older than the newspaper, by people the newspaper never thought to interview. The only genuine mystery here is why anyone reached for a hoax when the real thing was standing right there, deeper and stranger and sadder than any invented city, held in the open by the people who named it first. So if there is a villain in this at all, it is a quiet one, and it goes by a plain name: forgetting. It is the long, deliberate pressure of a century that tried to end exactly this kind of knowing. The removals, the boarding schools built to make native children stop speaking their own languages, and stop carrying their own accounts. The steady message that all of it was only superstition to be outgrown. A tradition that lives in the mouth is never more than one silenced generation from gone. That the Hopi account of the world beneath the canyon survived that century is due partly to the stubbornness of the Hopi themselves, partly to a kiva floor that keeps a copy of the door underfoot, and partly, strangely, to a few hundred printed pages gathered by a missionary who wanted the whole religion replaced and could not help preserving it instead. The story kept itself alive the way the people in it kept themselves alive, by holding on through everything that came for it. Before we close, if these old stories and the people who first wrote them down are what you came for, the final boss tier at $9.99 gets you members-only videos, plus your name in upcoming uploads. Boss tier at $4.99 for early access. Link in the description. Thanks for watching to the end. And it is still being held. The clouds still come up over the mesas in late summer, and the Hopi still lift their eyes to them and look, carefully, not directly, because they know whose faces are in them. The confluence down in the canyon is still kept quiet, still treated as the home of the dead, still guarded from the kind of visitor who would go down there to gawk. What lives beneath the Grand Canyon, in the only account that has ever had any real age or authority behind it, is the Hopi dead, and the rain they come back as, and the keeper of the door who owns both worlds at once. The Hopi named that place, and named those beings, and located them in the rock, centuries before a newspaper ever thought to invent a lie to sell over the top of it. They named it first. And they are still here, standing over the little dark circle in the floor, refusing to forget the shape of the world their people climbed up out of, or the country where they will one day climb back down.